The observation deck of Celestial Station offered the most breathtaking view of Earth that Julian Hayes had ever seen. The blue-green marble hung suspended against the velvet backdrop of space, peaceful and serene, a stark contrast to the turmoil in his mind. "Ambassador Hayes, you seem troubled." The melodic voice behind him carried the characteristic dual-toned resonance of all astrari, but he would recognize her particular harmonic anywhere. Julian turned to face Vexara Echo, her tall, willowy form silhouetted against the starlight. Her iridescent skin shimmered with patterns of light that reflected her emotional state, currently a cascade of nervous pulses he'd never seen before. "Just contemplating the weight of interstellar diplomacy," he replied, attempting a smile. 3 years negotiating trade routes with your people, and I still feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water." Vexara Echo moved closer, her 7-foot frame towering over him. The bioluminescent markings along her neck and shoulders flickered with increasing intensity. Among the Astrari, she was considered a junior diplomat, though her remarkable resemblance to Empress Vexara herself had always sparked rumors. "Julian," she said, using his first name, a rare intimacy in their professional relationship. "There is something of great importance I must share with you, something that will change everything." The seriousness in her 4 violet eyes made Julian's heart race. Their relationship had evolved over the past year, from formal diplomatic counterparts to something far more complex. Their cultural exchange sessions had become personal, then intimate. The Interstellar Diplomatic Corps had no specific regulations against such relationships, but Julian had always been discreet, aware of the delicate nature of human astrari relations. "What is it?" he asked, noting how the light patterns across her skin had formed into the swirling configuration he now recognized as anxiety. "I am carrying a child," she said simply. "Our child." Julian felt as though the artificial gravity had suddenly failed. That's impossible, our species." "Are compatible with certain modifications," Vexara Echo finished. That was precisely the hypothesis being tested. "Tested?" Julian's diplomatic training barely kept his voice level. "What do you mean, tested?" Vexara Echo's luminescent patterns dimmed slightly. "I was created for this purpose, Julian. I am a genetic duplicate of Empress Vexara, designed to determine if our species could produce viable offspring. The Empress wished to know if humans possess the genetic plasticity the ancient texts suggested." Julian's mind reeled with implications. "You're a clone of the Empress all this time." "An identical genetic copy, yes, but I am my own being," she insisted, her lower hands reaching for his. "What began as an experiment became something else entirely. My feelings for you are real, Julian. They were never part of the protocol." Julian pulled away, packing the observation deck. "Does the Empress know about us, about the child?" Vexara Echo's skin pulsed with deep crimson waves, the astrari equivalent of a blush. "She knows of the pregnancy. It was required that I report success, but she does not yet know the full extent of our connection." "And how did she react to the news of the pregnancy?" "With scientific satisfaction," Vexara Echo replied, then more quietly, and with envy. "Envy?" Julian stopped packing. "What do you mean?" "The Empress has never experienced what I have with you. In our culture, the imperial bloodline is preserved through controlled genetic replication. She has never chosen a consort, never carried a naturally conceived child." Vexara Echo's luminescence pulsed faster. "When she learned that I, her clone, had succeeded in conceiving a child with you and had formed an emotional bond, her reaction was complex." Julian felt a chill despite the climate-controlled environment. "What happens now?" Vexara Echo's 4 eyes glanced toward the communication panel, which had begun pulsing with an incoming transmission, bearing the imperial seal. "Now," she whispered, her voice tinged with fear, "you meet the true Empress." The imperial communication chamber felt suddenly too small as Julian stared at the holographic projection of Empress Vexara. The resemblance between her and Vexara Echo was uncanny, yet the differences were profound. Where Echo's luminescent patterns flowed with emotional transparency, the Empress's markings remained controlled, disciplined, a perfect royal mask. "Ambassador Hayes," the Empress's dual-toned voice resonated with authority. "Your presence is requested at the Imperial Palace on Astrari Prime. A diplomatic vessel will arrive within 3 rotations." Julian maintained his composure, years of diplomatic training taking over. May I inquire as to the purpose of this summons, your radiance? The Empress's 4 violet eyes narrowed slightly. To discuss the unprecedented development between yourself and my subordinate. Her gaze shifted to Vexara Echo, who had instinctively lowered her posture in the presence of her genetic original. The biological experiment has yielded fascinating results that require personal examination. After the transmission ended, Julian turned to Vexara Echo, whose skin had dimmed to a muted glow. Personal examination? What exactly does that mean? Vexara Echo guided him away from the communication chamber to her private quarters, where she activated several privacy screens, standard for diplomatic personnel, but used with unprecedented caution. Julian, there is more you must understand, she began, settling onto a cushioned platform designed for Astrari physiology. My creation was not merely scientific curiosity. The Empress has ruled for 3 centuries, but even Astrari lifespans have limits. She requires an heir. But I thought Astrari reproduced through cloning. The royal lineage does, yes, but it weakens with each generation of direct replication. The ancient texts speak of genetic revitalization through compatible species, humans being the most promising candidates. Her hands, both upper and lower pairs, trembled slightly. I was sent to test compatibility, not to fall in love. That was unexpected. Julian sat beside her, taking one of her hands in his. When did it change for you? When did the experiment become something more? Vexara Echo's skin rippled with waves of soft blue light, the Astrari expression of tenderness. Remember the negotiation on Luna Base? The environmental systems failed, and we were trapped in that module for 26 hours. Julian smiled at the memory. You taught me Astrari meditation techniques to conserve oxygen. And you told me stories of Earth's oceans, she continued. No Astrari had ever shown interest in human culture beyond strategic analysis. My handlers reprimanded me for the unnecessary data collection. Her luminescence intensified. But I couldn't stop. Each new fact about you, about humans, fascinated me. Eventually, I realized I was no longer reporting all of our interactions. You kept secrets from the Empress. A capital offense, she admitted, but the connection between us felt sacred, private. When intimacy developed between us, I justified it as thorough research. When I conceived, I reported it as scientific success. Her 4 eyes met his. But I never reported how your touch makes my luminescence synchronize with your heartbeat, how your laughter triggers resonance patterns in my vocal chambers that no other human does. These things are mine alone. Julian processed this revelation, and now the Empress knows. She suspects, Vexara Echo corrected, but suspicion is enough. Julian, when we arrive at Astrari Prime, she will want to understand everything about our compatibility, physically, genetically, emotionally. In her mind, what I have experienced was rightfully hers to experience first. What will she do? Vexara Echo's skin darkened ominously. The Empress always takes what she believes is hers. The Imperial vessel that arrived to transport them to Astrari Prime was a breathtaking display of the Empire's technological prowess. Its crystalline structure seemed to phase between solid matter and pure energy, a visual reminder of the vast technological gap between human and Astrari civilizations. Admiral Thrain, Earth's military liaison to the diplomatic corps, cornered Julian before departure. Hayes, I'll be blunt. Earth's Security Council is losing their minds over this situation. You've managed to impregnate a clone of the most powerful alien ruler in known space. Julian winced at the crass description. It's more complicated than that. Damn right it's complicated, Thrain hissed. The Astrari control access to 70% of the rare minerals our tech industry depends on. If you've offended their Empress, we're looking at economic collapse within months. So what are my orders? Julian asked, already suspecting the answer. Keep the Empress happy, whatever that takes. Thrain's expression softened slightly. Look, Hayes, nobody planned for this scenario, but right now you're the most important diplomat in human history. The relationship between our species might depend on, well, your relationship with her. The journey to Astrari Prime took 3 Earth days, during which Vexara Echo's pregnancy became increasingly evident. Astrari gestation accelerated after the first phase, and the soft, luminescent glow emanating from her abdominal region fascinated Julian. The child's bioelectric field is developing, she explained as they observed the pulsing light together in their quarters. See how it synchronizes with mine, then occasionally breaks into its own pattern. That indicates healthy neural development. Will the child be more human or more astrari? Julian wondered aloud. Neither and both, Vexara Echo replied. The genetic adaptations required for conception ensure the child will be a true hybrid, something entirely new. Her expression grew troubled. Which is precisely why the Empress is so interested. When they finally arrived at Astrari Prime, Julian was struck by the planet's unearthly beauty. The capital city seemed grown rather than built, organic structures rising in harmony with the natural landscape. At the center stood the Imperial Palace, a massive structure of living crystal that captured and amplified the light of the planet's twin suns. Imperial guards, tall, imposing Astrari with militarized bioluminescent patterns, escorted them directly to the palace. Julian noticed how the citizens they passed stared at Vexara Echo's pregnant form, with expressions ranging from awe to apparent horror. They've never seen a naturally conceived royal offspring, Vexara Echo whispered. Some consider it sacred, others heretical. The throne room defied human architectural understanding. The ceiling opened to the sky while somehow maintaining atmospheric integrity, and the walls shifted subtly, as if breathing. On the crystalline throne sat Empress Vexara, her commanding presence making the vast chamber feel small. Ambassador Hayes, the Empress spoke, her voice resonating throughout the chamber with harmonic undertones that vibrated in Julian's chest. You have accomplished something no human has before. You have merged your genetic material with the imperial bloodline. Julian bowed respectfully. An unexpected honor, your radiance. Indeed, the Empress descended from her throne, moving with liquid grace. Up close, the differences between her and Vexara Echo became more apparent. Where Echo's expressions were open and curious, the Empress projected calculated intensity. Tell me, Ambassador, did you know you were participating in an imperial experiment? Julian felt Vexara Echo tense beside him. A diplomatic crisis hung on his response. I understood my relationship with Vexara Echo to be personal, your radiance, he answered carefully. The profound implications became apparent only recently. The Empress circled him, her luminescent patterns shifting into configurations Julian couldn't interpret. Fascinating, the clone developed attachment beyond her programming. She stopped directly before him. And you, human, have you developed attachment as well? Julian met her gaze steadily. I have deep feelings for Vexara Echo, yes. Feelings, the Empress repeated, as if tasting an exotic delicacy. For a replica of myself. Her upper hands gestured dismissively toward Vexara Echo. Leave us, the Ambassador and I have much to discuss. As Imperial guards escorted Vexara Echo from the chamber, Julian saw fear in her eyes, not for herself, but for him. The Empress waited until they were alone before stating plainly. The child she carries represents the future of my empire, and you, Ambassador Hayes, possess genetic qualities I find desirable. For 3 days, Julian was kept in luxurious isolation within the palace, permitted to see Vexara Echo only during formal meals where conversation was monitored by Imperial guards. The Empress, meanwhile, arranged a series of elaborate cultural experiences, private concerts of Astrari harmonic music, tour of ancient heritage sites, intimate dinners featuring rare delicacies, all seemingly designed to impress him. On the 4th day, he was summoned to the Imperial Botanical Sanctuary, a vast biodome containing species from across the Astrari domains. The Empress awaited him beside a reflecting pool, her royal attire replaced by simpler garments that highlighted her natural luminescence. Ambassador Hayes, she began, dismissing her attendants with a gesture, do you understand why you are here? Julian maintained diplomatic composure. You've expressed interest in the child your clone carries. Not merely the child, the Empress corrected, moving closer. Her bioluminescent patterns shifted to configurations he recognized from his time with Vexara Echo, patterns of attraction. I am interested in the experience that created it. Your radiance. Vexara, she interrupted, when we are private you will use my name. Julian chose his next words carefully. Vexara, I'm deeply honored by your attention, but my relationship with Vexara Echo is. She is a copy, the Empress stated flatly. A laboratory creation designed for a specific purpose. That purpose has been fulfilled. Now I wish to experience what she has experienced, what is rightfully mine to experience first. Her directness was jarring. With respect, relationships among humans aren't transferred based on property rights. The Empress's luminescence pulsed with what might have been amusement. How charmingly primitive. You misunderstand, Julian Hayes. I'm not claiming ownership of your affections. She moved with liquid grace to stand before him. I am offering you the opportunity to form a genuine connection with the original, to experience the truth rather than the copy. And if I decline? Her four eyes studied him intently. The diplomatic consequences would be unfortunate, not merely for you, but for Earth. The resources your people depend upon could become suddenly scarce. She lifted a hand, tracing the air near his face without touching him. But I would prefer your willing participation. Coercion lacks authenticity. Later that evening, Julian was finally permitted an unsupervised visit with Vexara Echo. They met in her chambers, where additional medical equipment had been installed to monitor the unprecedented pregnancy. She wants me as her consort, Julian said once they had activated privacy screens. And she's using Earth's resource dependency as leverage. Vexara Echo's luminescent patterns dimmed with distress. I feared this. In 3 centuries of rule, she has never shown interest in companionship. Now she desires what we have. Can she force this? Julian asked. Diplomatically, I mean. The Empress's word is absolute law. If she declares you her consort, refusal would constitute rejection of an imperial honor, grounds for severing all treaties with Earth. Vexara Echo's lower hands rested protectively over her growing abdomen. Our child would be raised as royal offspring, but I would likely be reconstituted. Reconstituted? Julian felt a chill. My biological material would be reclaimed for imperial use, she explained matter-of-factly. Clones who have fulfilled their purpose are typically not maintained. Julian took her hands in his. That's not happening. There has to be another solution. A subtle shift in Vexara Echo's luminescence suggested an idea forming. Perhaps there is. The Astrari value tradition above all else, but respect innovation when it serves imperial interests. Her eyes met his. The ancient texts mention a practice called consortium plurality, a sharing of genetic material among multiple partners to strengthen royal lineage. You're suggesting a diplomatic solution, she finished. One that might satisfy the Empress's desires without destroying what we've built. The Imperial Council chamber fell silent as Julian finished presenting his proposal. 20 Astrari elders, their ancient forms glowing with subdued luminescence, exchanged complex light patterns too subtle for human interpretation. The Empress, seated at the head of the crystalline table, remained unnervingly still. 2 weeks of intense research, consultation with Earth's xenocultural experts, and careful planning had led to this moment. Beside him, Vexara Echo's luminescence pulsed with nervous energy, her pregnancy now visibly advanced. What you propose, the Empress finally spoke, has no precedent in our recorded history. With respect, your radiance, Julian countered. The child Vexara Echo carries has no precedent either. We are already in uncharted territory. His proposal was bold. A formal diplomatic union between himself and both Vexara and Vexara Echo, creating a new category of imperial relationship, a tri-bonded consortium explicitly designed for genetic diversity. Under this arrangement, both Vexara Echo and any children would receive full imperial protection, while the Empress would maintain hierarchical primacy. You suggest, one elder said, luminescent patterns flickering with what Julian had learned to recognize as skepticism, that our Empress share genetic resources with her own clone. I suggest, Julian corrected, that the Empire embrace an unprecedented opportunity. 2 genetic pathways with a compatible human partner, producing diversified offspring that could strengthen the royal lineage for generations. The Empress rose, silencing the murmurs that had broken out among the council. Leave us, she commanded. The elders filed out, leaving only Julian, Vexara Echo, and the Empress. Once alone, the Empress's carefully controlled luminescence relaxed into patterns of curiosity. Clever, ambassador, you've wrapped personal desire in the language of imperial benefit. The benefits are real, Julian insisted. Genetic diversity has saved human civilization multiple times throughout our history. The same principles apply here. And your Earth government, they support this arrangement. Julian thought of Admiral Thrane's final instructions. Make it work, Hayes, whatever it takes, he nodded. They've authorized me to negotiate any terms that maintain peaceful relations. The Empress approached Vexara Echo, studying her pregnant form with intense fascination. For the first time, Julian noticed something unexpected in her luminescent patterns, not just envy or scientific curiosity, but something like longing. You have developed beyond your programming, the Empress said to her clone. You were designed to test compatibility, not to form attachment. The capacity for attachment was encoded in my creation, Vexara Echo replied carefully. I am, after all, an exact genetic replica of yourself. Something shifted in the Empress's demeanor, a subtle change in her luminescent patterns that Julian couldn't quite interpret. Perhaps that explains my unexpected reaction to this situation. She turned to Julian. What you suggest would fundamentally alter 3,000 years of imperial succession tradition. Sometimes tradition must evolve to survive, Julian said. Humans have learned this lesson repeatedly. And if I agree to this arrangement, the Empress questioned, what guarantees that your affections will extend to me as they do to my clone? Julian met her gaze directly. The same guarantee that exists in any relationship, your radiance, honest effort and time to discover compatibility. I cannot promise identical feelings, but I can promise equal opportunity to develop them. 3 months later, Julian stood in the Imperial Medical Chamber, watching in awe as Vexara Echo's luminescence reached blinding intensity. The birth process among Astrari involved a harmonic resonance between parent and child, culminating in a synchronized light pattern that established the offspring's unique bioelectric signature. The Empress stood beside him, her own luminescence pulsing in rhythm with Vexara Echo's, a gesture of imperial blessing traditionally reserved for royal births. When the light dimmed, a small form lay in Vexara Echo's arms, its skin displaying luminescent patterns that shifted between recognizable Astrari configurations and entirely new ones. The child, a daughter, had Julian's eyes but the characteristic four-pupil structure of the Astrari within them. Her tiny hands were human in shape, but bore the bioluminescent markings of her maternal heritage. The first of her kind, the Empress whispered, an unfamiliar softness in her dual-toned voice. She extended a careful hand, and the infant's luminescence responded, synchronizing momentarily with the Empress's patterns. She recognizes you, Vexara Echo said, surprising both Julian and the Empress. Beyond the medical chamber's crystal walls, Julian knew that news of the birth was already spreading throughout the Empire and back to Earth. The unprecedented diplomatic arrangement had initially shocked both human and Astrari societies, but pragmatism had ultimately prevailed. Earth secured its resource needs and gained elevated status within the Empire, while the Astrari gained new genetic possibilities for their ruling line. As Julian looked between the genetically identical yet fundamentally different women who now shared his life, he marveled at how personal connections could reshape interstellar politics. The child in Vexara Echo's arms represented not just a genetic breakthrough, but a diplomatic one, living proof that unexpected bonds could form even across the vast differences of species and stars. The Empress's luminescence shifted to a pattern Julian had never seen before as she gazed at the child. "What will you name her?" she asked. Vexara Echo looked to Julian, who nodded encouragingly. They had discussed this moment extensively. "Aurora," Vexara Echo said, "after the Earth phenomenon where light dances between worlds." For the first time since Julian had known her, the Empress's luminescent patterns displayed something entirely unguarded: hope. "Aurora," she repeated, the name resonating with harmonic undertones in her dual-voiced speech. "The beginning of a new lineage, a new future." Julian took Vexara Echo's hand in one of his, and after a moment's hesitation, offered his other hand to the Empress. To his surprise, she accepted it, her luminescence synchronizing with his heartbeat just as Vexara Echo's had done when they first connected. Different paths, same destination. In the child's eyes, Julian saw the future of two civilizations, bound together by the most unexpected of diplomatic solutions.